So welcome everyone. As you will see, you are muted and your videos are off, but you can communicate via the chat. We're really happy to bring you our session on what do we mean by intersectionality and why does it matter? I want to start by saying a big thank you on behalf of my social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. Your donations will go towards increasing resilience, inspiring and raising aspirations in teenagers. If you want to find out more about Rocking Your Teens, do go to rockingyourteens.com, and my lovely colleague Snetta, who I think is called Venetia here, you'll see, will put the URL in the chat if you want to find out more. So my name is Jenny Garrett. I'm an award-winning career coach, author, and leadership trainer. My books explore the empowerment of working women and women in leadership roles. And together with my team, we use our years of experience in coaching and leadership to support women and those from ethnically diverse backgrounds to progress in the workplace, as well as supporting majority group leaders in making inclusion happen. So today is all about intersectionality, and I don't know how familiar you are with that term. So I wanted to start off by making sure that we were all on the same page and that we were all talking about the same thing. I'm just going to make sure everyone's entered from the waiting room. I can see there's quite a lot of people. Just going to quickly admit them before I continue. And anyone else with the co-host authority, please admit anyone who's not in the room if you see any. Thank you very much. So what are we talking about when we talk about intersectionality? Well, the pioneering scholar and writer Kimberly Crenshaw describes intersectionality as a lens, a prism, for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exasperate each other. We tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigration status, for example. But instead, what we do when we're thinking about intersectionality is think about how these things come together and the difference that they make. So I like another definition, which is by the Center for Intersectional Justice, that intersectionality is about fighting discrimination within discrimination, tackling inequalities within inequalities, and protecting minorities within minorities. So that's what we are going to be focusing on today. And during this session, experienced executive coaches, Claudia, Carol, and Hira, all listed in the Diverse Coaching Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from ethnically diverse backgrounds. We'll discuss what intersectionality means to them and why it matters in the world of work. And you can find out more about the Diverse Coaching Directory if you'd like to by visiting our website. And my colleague Hira will, not Hira, my colleague Snetta will be adding that into the chat very shortly. So how is this session going to run today? Well, Claudia, Hira, and Carol will briefly introduce themselves. I will start off by asking them some questions, and then we'll open it up to you for your questions and reflections. And we will keep an eye on the chat throughout. You can also tweet about this, Instagram about this, write a post on LinkedIn about this session. We'd really love to hear from you. The hashtag for the event is intersectionality, and the socials are Claudia WPC, at Advancing You, at Abound Solutions, at Jennifer Garrett, and at BAME Exec. But that, I know that's all too much to remember. So again, we will be putting that in the chat for you. So I'm going to start off with a poll. Intersectionality, I think, is a new concept to many people, but I think some organizations have got it and are talking about it. So what I'd like to know is, does your organization collect intersectional data? And I'd love it if you could just write in the poll, yes, no, or you don't know. Okay, so 72% of you have completed the poll. Let's see if we can get it up to 80%. Any more for any more? If you can't see the poll, you can just type in the chat. Does your organization collect intersectional data? Yes, no, or don't know. Okay, I'm going to share the results. Hopefully you can see that on the screen. So over half of you do not believe that your organization collects intersectional data. 30% of you, which is around a third, don't know. And only 12% of you are doing it currently. So this is really interesting. The 12% are ahead of the curve. And maybe have been working in this space for longer, but interesting to think about what we can do potentially to move those no's into yeses for the future and actually find out if our organizations are collecting intersectional data as well, because that would move a third somewhere else in this graph as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's just interesting for us to know as we start off this conversation today. Okay, so let's start by asking our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Claudia. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm Claudia Crawley. I'm an award-winning mentor, CEO and founder of Winning Pathways Coaching. So I do executive and career coaching for women who are mainly, but not exclusively, social workers. I'm also the author of Ordinary Women Doing Extraordinary Things and my latest book, Undeterred, The Success Equation of Women of Black and Asian Heritage. Apart from doing all of that as a coach, I've been actively involved in the anti-racism movement for 25 plus years. And I led the Race Equality Allies group of the Women's Equality Party up until autumn 2021. Just another thing you might want to know about me, I was once a stand-up comedian on the London open mic scene, but people only laughed at me. So
very good, very good. Love that. And Hira.
Wow, no pressure, Claudia, following you. But hello, everyone. My name is Hira, as already introduced, and I'm author, speaker, writer, author of 2 popular books, I'd like to believe, Her Way to the Top and Her Allies. And I speak and write extensively on racism, sexism, misogyny, Islamophobia, and all different forms of hatred. I'm a leadership executive coach, and I do workshops and coaching around the same topics: allyship, ethnic leadership, and women leadership.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Hira. And Carol.
Hey everyone, my name's Carol Stewart. I'm an executive career leadership coach and author of Quietly Visible, Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman. I specialise in coaching introverted women who are senior leaders, and I coach women to lead with confidence, influence and impact. And I also work with organisations to develop their talent, particularly around gender and ethnic minorities, and provide a range of workshops, training, talks on leadership development, personal development and career development. I've been named a LinkedIn Top Voice UK 5 times, including this International Women's Day, a top voice for gender equity.
Thank you so much. As you can see, we have a really wonderful panel with so much experience, extensive knowledge to bring to this conversation. So let's kick off with the first question. So intersectionality can sound like a bit of a theoretical concept, this idea of bringing together different parts of our identity and what that means for us. Can you bring the idea of intersectionality to life for us, either from your own personal experience or maybe from one of your coaching clients' experience, or a theme that comes from your coaching clients' experience? What does intersectionality actually look like? And how did the intersection of their identities impact them in the world of work? So I'm going to start with Hira.
Thanks, Jenny. So I would say as an Asian, brown, Muslim woman who is not native British, who moved to UK just 6 years ago, who doesn't have a British accent, who has a very regular, I would say, international accent. I did understand the concept of intersectionality. Yes, that, I was representing multiple identities. But I think it really hit me hard last year when I wrote my book on allyship and gender advocacy, and I started writing for national publications. And that was my first personal experience where after writing the article, it's great, you publish, yay. But when you look at the comments, you see a certain trend. And if you look at the comments, people would say, oh, yeah, they're just sexist comments and misogynist comments, because I was talking about gender advocacy there and nothing else. And I showed it to a very well-intentioned friend, a white friend of mine, who's a great ally. And she looked at the comments and she said, well, they're just very sexist. But I said, no, they're not sexist, because they were targeting my faith, my country, the color of my skin. So what was interesting and upsetting was that within that comment, I was a victim of not just sexism, it was racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and colorism, because they were like, oh, you are literally brown skinned. So things like that. And I think I'm laughing about it, but it took me quite some time to sort of just, digest that, because when I was explaining to people, what was frustrating was that nobody would understand. So only people from my country would understand what xenophobia is. Only people from my faith would understand what Islamophobia is. Only people from my color would understand what racism is. And nobody would understand the challenges of the multiple forms of victimization that an individual experiences. So I think that was my first experience of being victimized from different angles. And this might be a small sort of example, compared to the larger scheme of things and the grand scheme of things. But yeah, that was my first interaction.
And when we spoke about that previously, you were talking about the recovery time needed after you receive this kind of thing. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
So yes, I mean, after writing an article and looking at the comments, I usually disappear for 2 to 3 days, because I'm told not to look at the comments, but I'm tempted to. So I do look at the comments, and it's just frustrating, because you're like, why are you talking about my faith and my race when I'm talking about gender advocacy, and why are you blaming like men from my country, and so it was just a lot of different things to handle. So it takes me a time to recover, and I do take time off, because it's unsettling for me, and then I'm back again writing again. But yeah, recovery time is needed, because you need to sit and absorb this and then move on.
Thanks so much, Hira. That's just helpful to give an insight into what it feels like, and what the experience is like, and the toll it can take, actually. I'm so happy that you are a resilient person who keeps bouncing back from this, or would be robbed with all your writing and your insights. Carol.
Hi, so I often have clients who are of African heritage, and they are in senior positions in male dominated or white male dominated environments, and there's often a misunderstanding about their cultural identity, and particularly when it comes to sort of gender initiatives and organizations are looking to increase gender representation at the senior levels. They don't take into account the intersections of gender and race and the challenges for women of a diverse ethnic background may have, particularly around things like their cultural norms and their accents maybe, and the barriers that can then place on them. So for example, one particular client who felt that she was constantly being dismissed and being told that she was aggressive, and you may have heard of the angry black woman syndrome, as some people call it, where women are told that they are being aggressive or they're angry because it may be to do with their cultural identity and the way that they come across, which is not being understood. And then this can have an effect on the individual as well, in terms of how they perceive themselves. It can affect them in terms of their self-confidence, imposter syndrome, and a whole host of other things as well.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing that to the table. This idea that, yes, we're not just talking about one kind of woman, and different women have different experiences, and that's all, you know, around bias, around misunderstanding, misinterpretation, all sorts of things that could be causing it. And Claudia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, one of the things that really interests me about intersectionality is how it can be used as an analytical tool. So for example, when you're carrying out research, you're collecting data, it can unearth key information that can otherwise be missed. So if I give you an example of this, take the health service. There was a recent piece of research, I think it came out about 2 years ago, which found that the mortality rate amongst Black women is 4 times that of white women. And for Asian women, it's twice that of white women. Now, if the research lens that had been used focused solely on women generally, the disparity would have been missed. And the research would have concluded that in comparison to other countries, pregnancy and birth in the UK are safer for all women than they actually are. So when you use a intersectionality lens, looking at race and gender and perhaps disability, what it did, it highlighted an alarming picture of inequality in maternal health that could have been missed. And the specific issues which are faced by Black and Asian women would remain subordinated. You know, they say where focus goes, energy flows. So we can't correct the problem unless it's identified. And now it has been identified and we have the figures. It's down to the health service, the NHS, to take action and actually do something to put this right. So that's how intersectionality can be used as an analytical tool.
Thank you so much. I really love the way you all came at it slightly differently. Hira from her personal experience, Carol showing her client's experience, and then you helping us come at it from the data. And what for me, it's really highlighted how important this is to really be considering, and how much we're missing if we don't look at it from all of these different perspectives. So, you know, what could be the dangers of not taking an intersectional lens? And also, what are the opportunities for taking an intersectional lens for organizations? So we have started a little bit with the dangers there already with Claudia, but I'm sure there are more. So Carol, what do you think?
So some of the dangers, they include sort of discriminatory practices, unfairly disadvantaging certain groups of people where they're not necessarily, their needs are not being taken into consideration. When it comes to being inclusive as well, misrepresenting the fact that they are, as Claudia sort of mentioned, if it was a case of, you know, then they're looking, the NHS was looking and saying, well, in terms of women and comparing themselves to other countries, they're doing really well. But when you break down the data, you find that they're not doing so well. So you get situations like that. So although that applies to the NHS, that what Claudia described could apply equally to organisations where they're not breaking down the data and looking at it from an intersectional lens. And then that's, you know, that can exacerbate the problem. But when it comes to opportunities, organisations that do look at it through an intersectional lens will be more inclusive. They will be, there'll be diversity of thought, representation of a wide range of people, and also people to feel more like they belong as well. And I can give you an example of, you know, an experience that I had of where a gender initiative didn't take into account the different intersections, particularly the intersections of race. A few years ago, I don't know if you remember, the government established the Women's Business Council to look at how women can contribute to the economy and advancing women. And they had a wide remit looking at entrepreneurship, leadership, and so forth. And I went to a number of their events. And I would look around and I didn't see people like me, considering it was focused on advancing women in business and in leadership. there were not many women that looked like me. There was only 1 or 2 black or brown women, but then there were more men than there were women of colour. And that, to me, that just highlighted the fact that when you don't look at it through an intersectional lens, the problems that then can pose.
Wow, what an example. More, at a Women's Business Council, more men than women of colour. That just tells you something's not right. And it's a shame that you spotted it, but I bet lots of people didn't. And it would take you being in the room to spot it, to be honest, doesn't it?
That's right.
And that's why we need diversity to create inclusion, isn't it? Thank you for that example. Claudia, what about you? What do you think are the dangers and the opportunities for organisations?
Well, I think Carol's done a really good job of pointing out the dangers and the opportunities. I'm going to say something very similar, but I just want to push home the point that single focus lens don't unearth the different forms of discrimination, so we can't address them. Yeah, because we can't address them, we're simply reinforcing the oppressive status quo. And what we know about the status quo is that you're in an organisation, intersectionality is not taken into account, talented staff leave, marginalised people are disengaged, our customers and service users aren't fully understood, and business performance is poorer. And just to throw something else in here, I've actually been thinking about intersectionality in relation to child cues. And I have a huge question around whether if schools were using it and they were actually using it in instances like this, where children, are they're seen as troublesome. Yeah. Would this have prevented the adultification of this 15-year-old girl? Would they have thought twice about calling the police? And would the whole thing about being strip searched have been avoided? I mean, I think it would have. So, just to throw that one in here, it's a topical issue at the moment, and one which has had a huge impact on the Black community.
Absolutely. And I do think that if you're not aware of the case, please Google it, because some people might not be aware of it, but it's horrific. And I don't think there's anyone who doesn't think that it was disgraceful, that someone should not feel safe in their own school, should be strip searched in their school, a young girl, and her parents not even notified, no adult present apart from the police. And yeah, how much disproportionately does this happen to those from ethnically diverse backgrounds, young people, rather than from the white community, and why? And that intersectional lens absolutely, I think, would bring that up. So thank you for bringing that to the table. And Hira, what about you? What are your thoughts about the opportunities and the challenges and the dangers?
So I think it's dangerous because anyways, when you're looking at a single identity model versus an additive identity model, you are obscuring discrete sources of discrimination because you're assuming that access to power and privilege is determined by only one aspect of identity, which is gender. And I gave the example of a court case. When you are taking a case, for example, of sexism, then the racial contours might be ignored. So the danger is, of course, that you are ignoring the specific biases that women of specific faith, ethnicity, sexuality, sexual orientation, ability, age are subjected to. Claudia just mentioned adultification bias, which is very specific to Black girls. There is a docility bias associated with Asian women, for example, that they're expected to be meek and submissive, or Muslim women who are expected not to have an agency. And the problem with that is that it takes a toll on the mental health of women who are experiencing internal barriers such as stereotype threat, where they're representing multiple identities and they don't want to let down these identities they're representing, and they don't want to negatively affirm to the, they don't want to confirm to the negative attributes associated with all the identities they represent. So there's stereotype threat, there's excessive code switching, which is exhausting women. because code switching, especially in terms of if I talk about Muslim women, there's certain things which culturally they do not like. For example, they won't drink alcohol, they dress modestly, they would not do handshakes, and all of this is prohibiting them from progressing at work, because if they do it, sometimes they do it to fit in, so that's a violation of their culture. Sometimes they don't do it, and that's affecting their career chances. So a toll on mental health is a culturative stress, adapting to the values of the dominant culture in the room. So that is something which a lot of people who are on the cusp of intersectionality, they experience this, which will be ignored and which will not be taken into account. In terms of opportunities, of course, research has evidence that $12 trillion will be added to the economy if women progress at the same rate. And let me tell you, this is just about women. We don't even have data about women of color and, trans women or disabled women, other aspects of identities. So imagine how much more will be added if we take into account all the women. I was just part of this Gender Equity Commission, in which it was, nobody assumed this, but I was bringing this example that they were introducing e-scooters. And I said, it will be assumed that Muslim women, because, of cultural barriers, they might not be interested in e-scooters, but that's not true. That's just an assumption. That's just something they have in their head. So you will be missing out a large portion of the population who might be interested because of, not taking into account intersectionality. So if you do ask them, some of them might be very, very excited to try it. So I guess that's the opportunity where you need to make sure that everybody is contributing equally to the economy, because it's good for everyone. And might I add, a very important last point is that individual opportunity is that if you are a person who collaborates well with everybody, people from different faiths, ethnicities, backgrounds, you have what is called a sustainable collaborative advantage. People like to work with you. So individually also, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of making sure that you're taking into account intersectionality.
Lovely. I love that. Sustainable.
Could I just add something, Jenny? Sorry. Because what often happens is when organisations who are looking at things through an intersectional lens, they tend to focus on the protected characteristics, but it's so much more than that, because there's so many more identities that people have, so many facets to them that are not just under the 12 protected characteristics. So they need to be looking at people as a whole.
Yeah, and I know particularly you think about introversion and extroversion, don't you, in the work?
That's right. Yes.
Thinking about that. And there's also someone mentioned in the chat as well, auditory bias as well. So yeah. So there are so many different ways of considering this. So yeah, absolutely. Let's not limit it. But I guess when you start, maybe that's a good starting pace, and then you can build from there. For those, I can see there's one question in the chat, which I will ask after this question, after the next two questions, but they're not too long. But do start putting your questions in the chat if you have questions for Carol, Hira, or Claudia. So what are your top tips for organizations wishing to take an intersectional approach to advance inclusion? And I will start with Claudia.
Okay, the first thing I'll say, I'm going to continue the theme of using it as an analytical tool. I don't know how many organizations are already collecting self-identifying data in relation to staff recruitment, progression, state conversations, resignations, but if they're not, they should be, and definitely use intersectionality within those. And I suppose the starting point, as you said, is to use the protected characteristics as a starting point, and you can expand out from that. You learn a lot about how people, who's coming into the organization, who's progressing, how people are actually feeling once they're in there. And this will be according to the different protected characteristics: disability, LGBTQ+, gender, race, and religion. And also use it to develop your policies and make them more inclusive. There's an opportunity here to have policies that represent the organization and not just the people who are in the majority and in power. And the other thing I would add is I think it's important to ask questions about the challenges faced by employees. Yeah, within the actual workplace. And you can do that in one-to-one sessions and appraisals. And I mean, I'll give you a good example of asking these questions, something I do. If my coaching clients don't mention the part that gender, race, or disability or religion play in the issue they bring for coaching, if it just doesn't come up, I will make a point of asking a question that will get them to reflect on this. Is their gender and their race and their ability playing a part in this, usually a problem that they're bringing to coaching? And once I do that, they open up. They start to think of it and they open up, because they're not going to do it immediately because they don't know whether or not, even though I'm a Black woman, I'm willing to acknowledge and understand these issues. But once they know that, because I've asked a question that's got them to reflect on it, they do open up, and the exploration of what the issue is and how to deal with it takes on a completely different, a completely different dimension. So I would encourage organisations to think in terms of doing that, just asking those questions about what challenges they're facing, individuals are facing within the organisation. And I'll just give those 2 top tips.
That was quite a comprehensive answer. Carol, is there anything you want to add to what Claudia said?
I mean, I think Claudia's covered quite in depth. But yes, you utilise the data and collect the data, because if they're not collecting data, collect the data, analyse the data, utilise the data, and also for leaders to get to know their people. You can't know about somebody, what intersections are at play with someone, unless you really know your people. So get to know your people.
Such a good point. Yeah, get to know people. Yeah, I love that. And Hira, what about you? What are your thoughts about top tips for organizations?
So I think Carol and Claudia have covered it amazingly. What I would recommend is the allyship model, which I use in my book, Her Allies, is individually challenging people, because individual transparency and accountability is important. Having these conversations with them, because the more you talk about it, the more people will know. Sometimes it's only about creating awareness. And then, of course, challenging organization policies, not assuming that this different groups that you have in the organization, not clustering them and stereotyping them and assuming that all of them have the same issues because they're women of color or they're marginalized women. So because a Black woman's experience might be very different from an Asian woman. And again, like Carol very rightly said, it's not just these well-protected characteristics, women going through menopause, or women who are working part-time, there's so many different situations which we need to take into account. So I think those things are important, challenging the organization culture, and then establishing support which is sensitive to that particular group, whether it's faith-sensitive counseling, whether it's cultural-sensitive counseling. Today I was reading a report by NHS. There was this report done by Race Observatory, I think it's Association in NHS, and they found out that a lot of Asian and Muslim women were not getting faith-sensitive counseling because some of them were victims of, for example, sexual assault and abuse, and they were giving advice which was not really fitting in well with their culture and with their faith, and it didn't work well. So they never went back to counseling, and they never went back to getting the support because it was not. And again, there is this thing about how police should be trained on how to deal specifically with Black women, because they have, especially in terms of domestic abuse, and there's a group which is fighting for that. So I think it's very important to develop sensitive training, counseling, support services, which is unique to specific groups.
Absolutely, thank you. And it's really interesting. Yesterday, I was contacted by an organization who was asking me, have I done any work with those who have connections with Ukraine and Russia, because there's a lot of sadness and grief and concern in these communities right now with the war that is happening in this world. And this is a community, this is an intersection of identity that you might not be thinking about in your organizations right now. But I know that anyone I've spoken to who has connections with Ukraine or Russia is finding it really difficult at the moment. What support is in place for these colleagues? Are you even considering them? Are you considering that anyone here in this country has those connections and the impact it might be making? And again, it is that sort of intersectional lens that can help you consider these things. Oh, yeah, thank you very, very much. So I have, I am going to go to a question here. Well, actually, I'll ask you just for one resource each that you would recommend to help people start to think within an intersectional lens. And for everyone here, we'll create a blog and we'll put all of the resources on that blog as well. But I'm just going to ask everyone for one resource each. And I'll start with you, Hira.
Gosh, at this expense of self-advocating for myself, I would definitely recommend my own book, Hira Ali, a practical toolkit to help men lead through advocacy, but all of the strategies are equally relevant to all forms of allyship. Yeah,
it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. And I hope everyone's going to recommend their books, and all of their books are fabulous and they're all on my bookshelf and they're fantastic. So definitely I'm advocating them as an ally as well. Claudia, what about you?
Well, I have to recommend my book now that you've given me permission, Jenny. And it's called Undeterred, The Success Equation of Women of Black and Asian Heritage. And it's about 10 Black women, but they're all different. And that's where the intersectionality comes into it, Black and Asian from different backgrounds. So yes, I would highly recommend it.
Lovely, lovely. And Carol?
I guess I'm going to have to recommend my book as well, Quietly Visible, Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman. And it introversion, extroversion, that is often an intersection that doesn't get looked at, and the workplaces are more favorably geared towards extroversion, and introverted women often lose out. So it talks a lot about what introversion is and what it isn't, and how to overcome the barriers that they face. But if I can, I'm also going to share a couple of links in the chat, some resources that you can get for free. One's a toolkit from the UN Women, United Nations Women, and the other is the University of California. They've got some great resources as well.
Lovely. And we will share further resources. There's a fabulous TED Talk by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is the person who did all the research in the first place and talked about intersectionality. And I highly recommend her TED Talk as well. So thank you so much for sharing those resources, sharing your ideas. We have a question for you, first of all, Carol, and it says, you spoke of some of the clients you work with who feel discriminated in the workplace. In general, what sort of initiatives do you employ to empower such clients?
So first of all, it's about building themselves up, because often when they've experienced those, it can affect their confidence, it can affect their resilience as well. So it's about building themselves up so that they feel confident to be able to address those issues, and then to speak up about them and to address them. If they feel that they can't, then to think about whether they want to work in that sort of environment. But it's about building themselves up so that they have the belief in themselves and the confidence to then address it, to speak up about it, to challenge it. And when I say challenge, I don't mean in a aggressive way, but to challenge it and to see what they can do to bring about change. If they can't, it's about choosing which battles to fight.
Lovely. Do others want to add anything to what Carol said?
I think I would reinforce what Carol has said. Definitely enabling people to build themselves up, because one of the impact of discrimination within organisations is that people lose their confidence, they lose their self-esteem, takes a nosedive. And once they get to that, it's very difficult for them to get on and perform at their best. So the starting point is very much about building them up, enabling them to regain their confidence, and looking at different tools that they can use to sustain, tools and technique to sustain that within the workplace. And also, do they want to stay there? Is this an organisation that whose values match their own? They need to think about that. Might have to make some really difficult decisions.
Do you want to add anything, Hira, or Do you think it's all been said? Okay, I think Hira's having some technical problems. So I completely agree with you. The other thing that I would add is that when I've coached clients who experience discrimination, I think the biggest thing is that we as coaches believe them. And I think that they have often maybe even brought it up in their organization. It's been dismissed as a personality differences, or maybe they're imagining it, or toughen up, or whatever's being said to them. And I think the relief that they're not being dismissed and that they're being truly heard and seen is in itself a kind of watershed moment, actually, often for clients, where they're actually, someone sees what from through their eyes, understands, they don't have to justify themselves. And as a result, then they can start to move forward from it. Because if people keep telling you that what you see is not real, or it doesn't even exist, it's really hard then to move forward from that. So I think one of the biggest interventions is that acknowledgement, understanding, empathy, and then helping them to move forward. And one thing,
sorry, if I may add, sorry, my Wi-Fi connection is really spotty right now. I don't know what's wrong, but I think it's important to recognize that there are three barriers. So there are internal barriers like, imposter syndrome and acculturative stress, minority stress, confidence building. So that needs to be addressed. Simultaneously, there are external barriers. So giving them the tools, how to ask for promotion, how to address the organization barriers they're experiencing. And of course, the third is the interpersonal bias, because they will be experiencing microaggressions, harassment, bullying. So how to deal with that. So I think if we only focus on internal barriers and not how to address the organizational barriers, or not how to address the interpersonal barriers and biases, then we risk one at the expense of another. So it's just important to take into account all three, if that's possible, simultaneously, and find out what exactly is holding that person back primarily.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much for adding that. So we have another question. How do we break down work cultures that have fixed ideas about what leadership looks like in their organization, and as such don't consider intersectionality in terms of promotion, etc.? Yeah, I think that's a very real situation in maybe every single UK organization. So who would like to speak to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go. And again, it's about using your voice to influence. If you don't feel confident about using your voice to influence change, then look at identifying someone who is influential within the organization that you can go to, who believes in what you're talking about, who believes in this as well, and you having them be the voice to influence change. But until those who are making the decisions are open to having conversations, open to change, it's going to be a challenge. So it's about having those conversations, using your influence. If you're not able to influence, then identifying someone who is. So maybe picking out somebody, depending on what sort of level you are in the organization, identifying one person who maybe you get on well with, you've got a good relationship with, having a conversation with them, and then getting those allies that can then help to bring about that change.
Can I just build on what Carol just said? Yes, I definitely identify someone else, someone with influence. But I also think we mustn't overlook the power of collective action. So it's not just about finding those with influence who share your views and your values, but also other people. There's probably lots of other people within the organization who have a similar view. If you're all giving the same message, it's going to have going to have a much more powerful impact. So the power of collective action, remember that.
Yeah, and so if your organization has employee resource groups or staff networks, utilize those as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic point. And do you want to add anything to that, Hira? Or you're muted at the moment. Is it your internet?
I think another question has just popped up, so I was looking at that and I was thinking if I should.
Okay, do you want to speak to that one? So that new question, does intersectionality only concern Black women? If it only concerns other genders, then today, why are we only referring to the experience of women and only the Black women? There are other white women and other men who also have multiple identities which act to disadvantage them, such as disability, ageism, etc. I hold the view that such bias, if concentrated only on Black women, has a tendency to create resentment of such a framework, intersectionality. Just to speak to that before you answer, I did actually mention those from Ukraine and those from Russia, and what their experience might be, and not considering the intersection. And at that point, I was not talking about race or even gender, I don't think, at that point. So you may have missed that earlier, but I did expand it.
And if I could add, sorry, and if I could add to that, Jenny, I did so as well, say to look beyond the protected characteristics as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just
we
about
talked
the
about,
characteristics.
yeah.
And also we did mention disability and religion. So, you know,
And menopause, yeah. I mean,
menopause, yeah.
I think what we need to understand is that we can't really fall for the trap of oppression Olympics, who has it the hardest, because if we start doing that, then it just becomes complicated. I think we just need to understand this is sometimes multiple identities a person holds, whether sexuality, sexual orientation, color of the skin, socioeconomic background, education, accent, and there's so many things which I haven't probably even mentioned. Sometimes they intersect in such a way that it's difficult to distinguish one from another. So, for example, sexism can change and shape racism. Racism can shape sexism. And again, I speak that for all, trans women, LGBTQ+. In terms of socioeconomic background, in terms of ability, in terms of age, there are so many different characteristics which we perhaps don't even know about. I mean, I'm talking about something as small as a person who has specific allergies, and that person was spoken to me, and she was being bullied at work because she brought specific food. She brought dietary food with her, which had some sort of smell, and she was bullied for that. I mean, so, honestly speaking, it's such a wide thing that you can't touch everything. But I think it's important to understand that whatever makes you different, whatever makes you like the odd one out in the room, you will be experiencing those challenges that we talked about.
Yeah, I'd also like to add, we are from the Diverse Coach Directory, and we are people from ethnically diverse backgrounds talking here, and we will share our lived experience as well. So examples we share, some of the examples we share today might be from our own experience, and that is our lens on the world. And I'm quite unapologetic about that, because so often that lens and that voice is not heard. And this is what these sessions are for. So we have been really open and inclusive, I believe, but I'm also unapologetic about the fact that we are a panel of women, number one, from diverse backgrounds, which we're really proud of, and we want to share that experience. Fabulous. I think, are there any last questions coming through? Okay, I can't see any last questions. So I have a final question for the panelists. What's the big coaching question that anyone who wants to start looking through an intersectional lens should be asking themselves? So what's the big coaching question that anyone who wants to start looking through an intersectional lens should be asking themselves? And I'll start with you, Carol.
When making decisions about people or introducing policy, ask yourself, what and who have I not thought of when it comes to intersectionality?
Thank you. Who have I not thought of when it comes to intersectionality? Lovely. Hira.
I think what mechanisms organizations need to ask, what mechanisms they have in place to ensure that intersectionality is a big part of the conversation. And not just that, how often are they evaluated, and how and if they are sustainable or not, because it's not just about having a one-time conversation. So having that conversations and making sure that they are being evaluated and they're sustainable in the long run. I guess that was more than one question.
That's okay. You always give so much. Here, it's okay. Thank you. And Claudia.
Yes, the coaching question I'd ask is, what will you lose by looking through an intersectional lens, and what will you gain? They go together, one question, two parts.
These coaches, they sneak in so many questions. It's been really fabulous. I hope we've really given everyone some food for thought. In an hour session, you can't get to the bottom of everything, but I hope those who haven't been thinking about intersectionality before or looking through that lens will now be encouraged and curious to learn more, to have different conversations. A question from me is, could intersectionality be the bridge between diversity and inclusion in your organization? And I think, ponder on that question. Could it be the bridge that you have been looking for? So thank you so much for attending today. You will receive a recording and a link to resources from this session. A huge thanks to Carol, to Hira, to Claudia, who you can find more about in the Diverse Executive Coach Directory. As I said, it's a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And I believe that link will be going into the chat shortly. Our next event is on the 26th of April, and it's entitled Neurodiversity, an Asset? ? What does it mean for employers and employees? So we'll be focusing on neurodiversity on that session, something that I don't think we talk about enough. So thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for starting the day with us. It's really been enjoyable. It's been thought-provoking for me, and a brilliant start to my day. We look forward to seeing you next time. And if you want to find out more about the work I do, it's jennygarrett.global. See you next time, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.